carry the drums to. They say
Tribal style.
got you all clapping and tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping and tapping.
First, a drum set.
B5 come to the tribal drum jump. B5 come to the tribal drum jump. B5 come to the tribal drum jump. B5 come to the tribal drum jump.
Good evening, and welcome to the Do the Math podcast. I'm your host, Devin Morgan, and tonight with episode 0, we are going to give you a little bit of an explanation of our intentions here, a prelude, if you will, to what we hopefully have coming down the pike. Obviously, with the name the Do the Math podcast, we take our inspiration from the Tribal Productions release, second full-length compilation album. Obviously, the first was Untranslated Prescriptions. This one, Do the Math. In my mind, Tribal has always occupied kind of an interesting place in Seattle music history, being at the forefront of, I guess, what would be considered the second wave of Seattle hip-hop. The first wave, obviously, being dominated by Sir Mix-a-Lot, but also including Shelly Chell, LSR, Brothers of the Same Mind, Emerald City Boys, MC Kid P, and the Incredible Crew. Shout out to DJ Supreme. The second wave, I think I would humbly submit that Tribal was kind of at the forefront of that wave. And when we're talking about Tribal Productions, to be specific, who we're talking about is a collective kind of formed very much Wu-Tang-esque, but with a lot more variance in terms of sound and tone and message. To be ultra specific, you're talking about the Ghetto Children, DJ and MC Vitamin D, B Self. You're talking about Narcotic, Tizzy-T, rest in peace, keep it lit. And you're talking about C-Note, aka the Note, aka the Note Work. You're talking about Sensimilla, DJ Topspin, and H-Bomb. You're talking about Fat Mob, D-Unique, E-Rec, Poetry. You were talking about Capabilities, Culture, The God Infinite, Sho-Nuph, Samson S, Truth, T.H.C, Shahrazad, a real broad spectrum of kind of artistic message contained within the group. And the thing about Tribal putting out music in the the mid-ish 90s up until a little bit towards the end of the 90s is that again, in that second wave group, so post first wave, Emerald City Boys, all the aforementioned groups, and pre-third wave, which I guess you would consider kind of Blue Scholars, Boom Bap Project, Dime Def, Fade Luciano, that kind of era. The interesting thing about the second wave is that it's really, in my mind, it's the last group kind of came up under the old rules. Shout out to the new rules. Thank you, Jay. But under the old rules, when there were really inescapable and definitive costs to putting out music that you really couldn't get away from. And in coming up in that era, I think to really kind of paint a picture of how defined that was, you can, I've got an analogy. So instead of saying that we're releasing music in 1995, let's take a jump back to 150 years in the past, to 1845, and instead of an MC, you are a fiddler, and you are not any fiddler, just some jackass fiddler. You are the Jimi Hendrix, the Eddie Hazel, Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, Dwayne Allman, pick a guy. You are the fiddling equivalent. You force people to change their conceptions of love, life, their place in the universe by virtue of the music and the message that you communicate via fiddle. Now, as this fiddle player of immense gift, the principal obstacle you have to getting your music out is physical transportation. You have to transportate transportate, that's not a word. You have to transport your music, which in this case is you, all over the world, because otherwise, how else are you going to ply your wares? People don't know who you are. We don't believe you. We need more people. You can't get away from that. And best case scenario, you have a horse and a carriage. Worst case scenario, hope you like walking, because that's what you're going to have to do. You have to go from town to town, place to place, go into the center of the town, tell everybody to shut the fuck up because you don't have any amplifier. Peep game, I'm about to wreck shit on the fiddle, son. And then proceed, right? But the whole thing is predicated on movement. You have to move from place to place. And so let's flash back forward to 1995, 150-year jump. And I would argue that the similarities vastly outweigh the differences. Certainly you have two big advantages, one of those being recorded music and the other one being the radio. But when it comes to recorded music, the reason that things are so similar is because the whole thing hinges upon you taking this this thought, this emotion, this message as an artist you have, and extracting it out of yourself and turning it into something you can hold, right? It's got to be turned into this. And to go from in here to this has costs. Finite, inescapable costs. Shit you can't get away from, right? And then, once it's turned into that physical product, you can move it. But what's the difference? You're not moving yourself on a horse and carriage or walking. You're moving a physical thing, right? Sure, you have radio, and that's a big outlet. However, again, how are you going to get from in here to the radio? Well, you have to do the same thing. You have to pay the cost to extract your message and turn it into something that you can physically hold. And not only are there defined costs that affect your ability to put out and to disseminate your message at that point, but I think it's also important to acknowledge that they're defined costs that were understood and accepted and really impacted and informed your understanding as an artist is what you were going to have to endure and what you were going to have to get through to put music out. You grow up with that understanding, and from moving up from pause tapes with the karaoke microphone setup to 2 tracks to 4 tracks, the whole thing culminates in turning your message into something you can hold, right? And that whole system changed in a very, very, very short time. And I'm obviously not telling you anything you don't know, but you have to understand that we went from 150 years and things were pretty much the same. Take a 10-year jump forward, go from 1995 to 2005, and it's a sea change. It's glacial. We are post-internet, post-MP3, post-iPod, post-Napster. The music industry, if not dead, is dying on the vine because it's attached to this old method that was very much beneficial for major label artists, not so much for independent artists, which is the space that that Tribal Productions occupies in this tale. And I'm not going to sit here and say that that's a bad thing. It'd be very easy to just kind of occupy the old man river approach and, sit over here and say, oh, things are so much better when I grew up, in my era, blah, 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 get off my fucking porch. And I don't want to say that. I don't feel that way. The reality is if you told me, that, having this decreased cost of entry for artists nowadays meant that, 30% or 50% of music that I've greatly enjoyed that has come out of the town in the last 5 to 10 years doesn't exist, that would suck. That would be horrible. That'd be absolutely horrible. And sure, having a lower cost of entry might means that, it means that we have kind of the syndrome that we have now where there aren't any fans anymore. Everybody's an artist. But it also, I think, provides certain people, I guess, because I don't rap, I don't sing. Uh, I think it provides certain people with an ability to get in the mix that they might not otherwise have. I think about Malice and Mario Sweet, an R&B group, real R&B, which is which is like unicorns nowadays. Um, Malice and Mario Sweet, who I don't know from Adam or Eve, but my understanding of their situation is that they are two, they're adults, and they're adults that have careers and lives and a family, but they also are able to put out this beautiful music. If you haven't checked out their 2 albums, go do so. They're extra dope. And I honestly don't know if the situation for them being able to put out music would be different if it was 1995. I'm not saying that like a rhetorical question, like I really think I know the answer. I don't fucking know. But the thought that it might be restrictive to people like them to put out music, that'd be horrible. That wouldn't be good. But the thing that I think we need to examine is, and I don't even know that we have the correct amount of distance away from this change. Is just, but it's, you really have to, you can't overstate how important the impact of that change was in such a short period of time. Being able to disseminate information for virtually no cost. Yeah, and you go back to the same thing. You have as an artist, you have an idea that you want to extract out of your soul, and you don't have to pay to turn it into a thing. It stays in a collection of ones and zeros, and you can touch basically anyone, anywhere, anytime. You can make yourself available, and certainly that comes with its own problems, because now everyone is a small fish in a huge pool, and there really aren't a lot of big fish. So maybe it's a little bit more difficult to get noticed. However, at the same time, you see software solutions and products that companies put out that are specifically designed to say, "Oh, well, you listen to XYZ today? Do you like this?" Music is going to find you, and companies, and this is something that I think we're going to talk about in a later installation, another episode. One of the big things that I think you're going to find in the next 5 years is kind of a return to this idea that there needs to be a curator. And I don't know that right now Spotify does the best job of doing that, but they're at least trying. You listen to Ghostface today. Would you like to listen to Noriega and Capone, or would you like to listen to Nori's solo work? They're building an intelligent database of stuff that, if you liked X, maybe you liked Y, and that is probably the biggest benefit to this post-internet decentralization of information when it comes to music releasing. But going back to Tribal, I think you really have to acknowledge their place as being kind of the last group that came up under that old idea of, these are the costs, you can't get away from them. And I think someone smarter than me probably would behoove them to kind of look at, did that change anything about the content of what we're putting out? Did it change anything about the message? If it costs less to put out, does it make it less important? I don't know. Is it a good thing that people are more free to just say kind of whatever? You're not limited to, well, I'm an MC in a group, in a collective, and we've got a compilation record, and I've got 30 minutes on this side, and of that I've got about 45 seconds that I can put out my own music, that I can put out my message, my one thing that I get to say. I got about 45 seconds to do it. So it's kind of important. So now you have the absolute inverse of that. If you want to put out, anything, you can. It doesn't mean that it's going to find an audience, so maybe you're barking up the wrong tree there. But I don't know that you have to look any further than some of the, I don't know, the riff-raff-ish cats that are in the music industry right now, where this kind of pervasive stream of consciousness thing is actually a style. I don't. What would it cost to do that in 1995? And does the very nature of the elimination of costs provide an environment for something like that to thrive in? I don't know. I'm too stupid to figure it out, but I would hope that somebody would. Um, so again, to get back to tribal, to me, that's just been kind of one of the interesting things about their place in terms of Seattle's, Seattle's historical, musical timeline. In addition to just the fact that, these are guys that are making music in the mid '90s, absolutely in the shadow of the grunge revolution that was coming out of the town. And this is a little bit of a tricky thing to state, but the fact that certainly a lot of the attention is going to virtually fell to those groups who are making music in that sound, in that genre, of course. But you got to kind of wonder, well, why is it these voices from the Central District and these voices from the South End and the Rainier Valley are kind of repressed? They have no venue. You got KCMU, you got Rap Attack for an hour and a half, 2 hours on a Sunday. So that's 2 hours, or I don't even remember. Maybe it was 3. I'm getting old. You have that minute amount of time on Sundays, right? And then you got 6 and 7, 8s or whatever of the rest of your weekend. Was there any kind of voice for those? Was there any kind of venue for those voices in the rest of that week? Not really. Not really. The biggest thing back in the day was, well, Cube won't play us. Cube won't. Well, they wouldn't. They wouldn't. And sure, you had Mix-a-Lot, and I guess you have Kinsensation a little bit. But in that era, whoever got attention here in this town from the existing venues that there were, well, there wasn't really any. So here we are, the benefit of hindsight. One of the things that I think we want to do is to try to shine a light on some of those voices, because they didn't have a venue back then, but we can make one now. And I guess the second way that I would explain kind of our intentions here are my intentions, to take you back in a different kind of Wayback Machine to several years ago when I bought a camera, and I bought that camera with the kind of the expressed intent of trying to film a documentary on the people that comprise tribal productions. And here's the story. Here's the pitch. The pitch is that the conventional artist story goes from, you're young, you want to make music, and you put it out, and you either go up that mountain and you shoot in the outer space and get signed to a major label, and you have all the benefits of that thing, or you don't, and you fall. You go down the mountain, and that's kind of the end of your story. And in my mind, the compelling thing about the men and women that comprise tribal productions is that you can see almost down the line a concerted effort to stay attached to some degree of creativity. And that's compelling, because what's the truth about you as an artist? If you don't make it, do you still make art? And if you didn't, were you really that in love with it to begin with? Conversely, if you continue to stay creative in the face of not making it, what does that say about how pervasive that art is within you? What does it say about kind of the enduring artistic spirit that you would continue to do this thing, continue to exercise this muscle, when it's not going to turn into the thing that you wanted it to when you started. Hopefully it's not too difficult to unpack that sentence, but if that's not going to happen and you persist and you strive, and maybe the goal isn't making it anymore, maybe the goal is just to be an artist. That's compelling to me, and it's an interesting thing within hip hop culture, especially because we haven't really done the best job of celebrating the way that our heroes have aged. Certainly, maybe a part of that is just because the whole thing is so it's so rooted in this, a lot of cutthroat machismo. I am the freshest because of X, Y, and Z, and you are not because of items 1, 2, 3. It's not really set up to celebrate our icons as they get older, because we don't want to see the old bull on the hill giving sage-worthy advice to the young bull, as terms of how he approaches the valley. We say, "Fuck you, old bull. You're whack. You're old. You're done. What are you trying to do? What is your mission, old bull? What are you trying to accomplish here?" And that's kind of a sad thing. I think about rock music, and I think about, I don't know, there's a Buddy Holly museum, and I am not a Buddy Holly expert, but I know enough about Buddy Holly to know that the guy came out, released some records, and died in a plane crash. And I'm sure if you are a real Buddy Holly aficionado, that horrible summation, it just makes you really just want to come through the screen and just slap me across the face. And I'm sorry, but it's not my shit, so I don't really know the history. But I know enough to know that that was the guy's trajectory. Real short and done real fast. Died. And there's a Buddy Holly museum. I don't know. We're coming up on 50 years away from Sugar Hill, right? And not that that's the definitive sign or start of the culture, but that's kind of an interesting line in the sand. And where's their museum? Like other than the Museum of Rock and Roll. And I get it. Trying to get in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Because I think it's probably tied to another idea of this is a valid art form. This is a valid expression of humanity. And we're going to achieve a little bit of that validity by getting in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because those guys are going to give us validity and acceptance. And that's great, I guess, on the one hand, for rock guys to be like, yeah, let's have Run DMC in the hall. Sure, I get it. But shouldn't there be another thing? If the expression and the art is valid and it has a history worth presuming or worth preserving, shouldn't we be doing that? I digress. I wanted to film that doc on Tribal because I think it's a really compelling story with a lot of great people who I've had the honor and the privilege of getting to know over the last, 10 or 15 years. But here's my reality. My reality is that between my work obligations and my family obligations, which I value greatly, I don't have time to do that. So I struggled with kind of this idea that, well, that's something that you got to let go. Got to do it, because for the hundreds of hours that it would take to compile the amount of footage to make that piece complete, I don't have it. I don't have it. I do not have that time, and I would not be willing to make the sacrifices to make that happen. And I guess that's the most true explanation of that I can give. However, the good thing about this post-internet, post-MP3, post iPod revolution is that now with very modest equipment that I'm looking at in front of me here, we can do this podcast thing, and we can create a venue for some of these artists to tell their own story about what it was like coming up in that era, what those experiences were like when, let's say, you couldn't book shows at every club in the city. Let's say that there were a lot of clubs in the city that had no interest in booking you. So if you're an independent artist and it costs you money to produce your product, and even in your own backyard you can't do shows, how's that going to work? Not to really go down that path too far, but I think the podcast format is perfect venue for this to happen, to give some of these men and women that comprise tribal and really other groups of that era a venue to tell their own story, because I think they're stories that are worth telling and they're worth preserving. Unfortunately, a couple years ago we lost Tizzy-T of Narcotic, which kind of forced me, as someone who has gone from a fan to more of an advocate for a lot of these artists and their place in Seattle music history, to kind of feel like this is the shit or get off the pot moment where something needs to be done while guys are still around to document some of these things and get the record out. And I'm certainly not the only person that is striving to kind of walk that path. There are other people in the town that are doing so, and I salute each and every one of them. But my thing has always been tribal, just because the music touched me. So that's where I'm going to stay. And when it comes to hip hop culture, it's the least that I can do to find a way to give back to a music and a cultural expression that has given so much to me. And so that's where we sit. Hopefully we're going to be giving you episodes on a fairly regular basis. Our first guest is going to be DJ Topspin, aka Barry Blendiana Jones. We'll be having him in tomorrow, ideally to kind of talk about his journey. Obviously, he is staying real active as a DJ in the town right now, which is exactly kind of my theory. If I'm not going to sit here and say you're a real artist and you're not a real artist, because that's horseshit. But I do think that it's something deserving of recognition when you see someone finding a lane to stay creative in. That's something that deserves respect. So that's what we're going to do. And we'll give you more guests after that, and more guests after that, and there'll be, hopefully this thing won't go entirely off the tracks, but I make no promises. But again, this thing is free, so no returns. And that's, I think that's it for our prelude. So hopefully check us out. Very soon we'll be dropping what is the real episode 1 of the Do the Math podcast with DJ Topsman, aka Barry Blendiana Jones, very shortly. And we'll catch you then. So, good evening and take care.
5 to the tribal dum dum.